Now, from CBS News Miami, this is Facing South Florida with Jim Defede.
Welcome to Facing South Florida. I'm Jim Defede. Later in the show, we will answer that age-old question, where in the world will Marco Rubio be on Tuesday morning? And here's a hint. It won't be in the White House Situation Room or shuttling between European and Middle East capitals. Nope. Instead, he'll be in a federal courtroom in downtown Miami, testifying in the criminal trial of his longtime friend, former Miami Congressman David Rivera. I'll explain why later. But we begin today's show with Democratic Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz and the war with Iran. In addition to the 13 members of the U.S. military who have been killed so far, and the more than 200 servicemen and women who have been wounded, the first 3 weeks of the war is estimated to have cost the U.S. taxpayers nearly $25 billion. And although Donald Trump keeps saying we have already won the war, he is requesting an additional $200 billion in funding for the Pentagon. Here is what Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth had to say about that request.
Well, as far as $200 billion, I think that number could move, obviously. It takes money to kill bad guys.
Something else that costs money? Healthcare for Americans. To put that $200 billion Pentagon request into context, the cost of extending the Obamacare healthcare subsidies that helped millions of Americans afford health insurance and that Republicans in the House and Senate refused to fund this year, well, that was only $30 billion. But I digress. When I spoke to Wasserman Schultz, I asked if she would support the request for $200 billion to continue the war.
I want to make sure our military has the resources they need when they're trying to keep us safe. But I also need to understand what the objectives are, what's the plan for execution, what are they using those resources for, and be able to make sure that it's clear the direction that we're headed and how we're going to get there.
But you can see how people may say that he's basically doing this backwards, prosecuting the war and then coming to you for the money later, and that if you go ahead and approve a supplemental of $200 billion, you are essentially then authorizing him to prosecute this war without ever having gone to Congress to begin with or build an alliance with our allies to make sure that this could get done properly. How concerning of that is that anything you do to support a supplemental will be seen as agreement with the war?
Well, I think he absolutely has done it backwards. I mean, he should have come to Congress. He should have had clear objectives. He certainly has been prosecuting a war, even though they were kind of all over the map initially on, it's an excursion, it's a military engagement, it's a war. I mean, there's no question about it. We've lost 13 service members, over 200 injured, more to come, and the massive military impacts across the region are significant. I will expect if they're going to make an ask like that, in the $100 to $200 billion range, the administration has to come to Congress. I am someone who said they were really off the mark and off base not to come to the Congress with an authorization for use of military force. I mean, I believe that Iran is the worst terrorist threat and the most dangerous country on the planet. Had I heard a rational explanation, it is quite possible that I would vote for an AUMF. But they have chaotically executed this war. Gas prices in Florida are, this is Thursday, are nearing $4, could be over $4 by the time this airs. And diesel per gallon being $5 is the seriously economically impactful.
Did Israel lead us into this war? You talk about how chaotic it now seems to be, the prosecution of it. Did Netanyahu essentially bamboozle Donald Trump into a war with Iran, which is something that he's wanted for a long time?
It is so incredibly dangerous to lay this at the feet of the leader of another country. Israel is the United States' closest ally in the region. We closely coordinate on intelligence and military activity, but it is dangerous, particularly for Jews around the world, as we've seen with the Temple Israel attack and the attack in Austin, to start pointing blame at Jews and at Israel for the decision that President Trump made to attack Iran. He went into Iran in what seems to be a not very well thought out way. He should have come to Congress. The chaos and the way it's being executed, the blame, we cannot let Donald Trump off the hook. Any blame for how things are going right now is at his feet and on his head.
I agree with you. I agree with you that I understand the danger inherent in it and the rise of anti-Semitic propaganda, anti-Semitic attacks. But there's also wanting to understand the truth of how we got into a war. And whether it's dangerous to have the conversation or not, do you not worry and are you not concerned? Senator Rubio or the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, the president, others have seemed to say that this was a war of choice by the Israelis that we then ended up having to support and go along with out of fear that Iran would have attacked us once Israel made the decision to go forward.
Any concern or blame for the reason that we launched an attack against Iran lies at the feet of our president. He is making these decisions. The fact that the administration and our Secretary of State tried to, and the president tried to blame Israel for the reason that they had to attack, is outrageous and cowardly and dangerous. Any action, military action that we take as a country, the president is the commander in chief. The blame and the responsibility and the accountability lies at his feet.
I want to get to DHS shutdown and Cuba, but I do want to talk a little bit about the rise of anti-Semitism. In part, I think there is some credible evidence that the way this war has unfolded has led significantly to that, but there were other issues that have come up. We see that the University of Florida College Republican chapter is being disbanded because of anti-Semitic material and Nazi salutes that the head of it were doing. The FIU chapter of TPUSA and the Republicans here expressing virulent views in a group chat setting. All of this, involving a lot of young men, apparently, in the magosphere. And add to that, I will just throw in a character like James Fishback, who is running for governor in the state of Florida and is actually outpolling the sitting lieutenant governor right now. Granted, James Fishback is only in single digits, but he's running a campaign targeting young men in particular with racist and anti-Semitic tropes. Where do you see the state of things, both in terms of what's happening at UF, at FIU, and with Fishback's candidacy?
Jim, there is serious rot in anti-Semitic and racist, bigoted rot in the next generation of the Republican Party that they appear to be doing little to nothing about. You don't even have most of the leadership of the Republicans condemning the actions, the comments. They aren't doing enough to disband these organizations. I'm glad UF is dismantling the UF College Republicans. There's a lawsuit that's taking place now. This is all the FIU incident went on. The text chain went on for months. Horrific, anti-Semitic, back and forth, misogynistic, racist commentary, where we see significant racism and anti-Semitism, and we have it on the left. We have the concern on the left too. We need to take steps to make sure that we can educate and bring together unity in the next generation. The Republicans don't appear to be making any effort because they benefit from the motivation of that generation, and they are engaged, and they don't want to discourage their engagement. That's not acceptable.
I do want to turn to DHS. We are seeing long lines for TSA agents at airports. Also, just on the broader field, having the Department of Homeland Security not funded while we're in the midst of a war with Iran seems counterintuitive.
It is Republicans that are keeping the Department of Homeland Security closed. CBP and ICE have $150 billion. They have enough funding until 28 or 29 from the one big ugly law they passed last year. And the reason that the Department of Homeland Security is closed is because the Republicans refuse to do a few basic things that the overwhelming majority of Americans support. They refuse to ensure that when they are detaining an undocumented immigrant, that they have to get a judicial warrant, that they can't just bust down people's doors and do illegal search and seizure. That's unconstitutional in this country. The masks need to come off. The name tags need to go on, and we need to make sure that ICE is functioning like a regular law enforcement agency and not, running roughshod over the public. They're stopping lawn trucks in Davie and Cooper City and Southwest Ranches, indiscriminately. I mean, they're targeting people based on their looks and their accent. We need reforms.
Let me play devil's advocate for a second. Democrats have successfully raised the profile so that Kristi Noem, the DHS secretary, was fired. The pending DHS secretary, Mark Wayne Mullen, has testified at the Senate confirmation hearing that he would move forward and only use judicial warrants before entering a home, that he would reverse what had been the policy before. Can you not accept a win and move forward, or do you risk losing it? Because if there is an act of domestic violence or domestic terror in the United States, do Democrats risk being blamed for it?
Jim, I'm a show me person, not a tell me person. What matters is what's codified into the statutes. So I'm glad that Mark Wayne Mullen committed to using judicial warrants to detain undocumented immigrants. That makes it much easier to wrap up this compromise, put it into the statute. Let's ensure that that's the law and it has to be followed. Let's make sure that ICE actually beefs up their training because it was woefully inadequate and pathetic. Very simple. Take the masks off, put the name tags on so that people know who it is, that they can face their accusers.
I want to turn to Cuba. Donald Trump has been making a lot of statements basically saying that he feels free to just take Cuba. I'm not sure what that means exactly. I know that there have been some negotiations that are taking place. They seem to be both up and down at different times. When you hear the president talking about taking Cuba and part of a sort of an overall strategy, first Venezuela, Iran, next Cuba, legacy building for the president, what is your thoughts as to how we're approaching this change in Cuba?
Well, I've fought side by side, as you know, with my Cuban-American colleagues for a free Cuba, for free and fair elections, for the release of political prisoners, for the ability for Cubans on the island to express themselves freely, economic reforms that ensure that we eradicate communism on that island. I am a firm anti-communist, but for Donald Trump to say that he could do whatever he wants with Cuba, for him to actually have his Secretary of State and other leaders in his administration negotiating to simply remove Diaz-Canel, who is basically the Castro regime's puppet, and leave the regime in place, and basically make it so that Cuba is in economic servitude to Donald Trump's billionaire cronies in the United States. That's an unacceptable outcome. The Cuban people on the island, Cuban Americans in exile, absolutely want to truly be free. And we should be making sure that any negotiations that take place, the only acceptable outcome is true freedom and a full removal of the regime and an end to communist rule there.
So the notion that Marco Rubio has met with the grandson of Raul Castro and possibly trying to find his own version of Delcy Rodriguez for Cuba, you think that's unacceptable?
To replicate what's going on in Venezuela, where we removed Maduro as the head of the serpent, only to replace it with his chief torturer, with Delcy Rodriguez, and leaving that regime in place, no pathway to democracy. I mean, some political prisoners released, but essentially making Venezuela in service to our oil barons and oil billionaires. That is not the model that would be at all acceptable 90 miles from our coastline, where we have generations of Cuban Americans who have fought relentlessly to ensure that their island can be released from the shackles of the communist regime. And Donald Trump just thinks he can do whatever he wants and is cavalier about whether or not we're just going to rearrange the deck chairs on the Titanic and call it a day. That would be an outrageous, unacceptable, disrespectful outcome to the generations of exiles who have been yearning for freedom on the island, and to the Cubans there who deserve it.
When we come back, just when Marco Rubio thought he was done with crazy Miami politics, well, they're pulling him back in. Stay with us. Welcome back. The United States is at war with Iran. The Middle East is on fire. NATO is falling apart. Cuba is on the brink of collapse. And Venezuela is still being run by Maduro allies. So where will Marco Rubio be on Tuesday morning? Well, the Secretary of State and National Security Advisor will be in a federal courtroom in downtown Miami testifying against his longtime friend, former Congressman David Rivera. A little background. In 2017, Rivera was given a secret $50 million contract by the U.S. subsidiary of the Venezuelan oil company PDVSA. Supposedly, the contract was a way to help the company expand business in the United States. But federal prosecutors claim it was really a payoff by Venezuela's government to try and negotiate an end to the U.S. sanctions against the country. And why would Venezuela hire a middling, one-term former congressman with a history of scandal? Well, one possible answer is that Rivera helped them gain access to Marco Rubio. Rubio and Rivera have been close friends for decades. They owned a house together in Tallahassee and were roommates when they served in the Florida legislature. And in terms of access and gaining it, well, it worked. Rivera arranged 2 meetings with Rubio and others in 2017 to discuss the future of Venezuela. Ultimately, nothing came of the meetings, but in December 2022, prosecutors charged Rivera with failing to register as a foreign agent and money laundering. Rivera denies he did anything wrong, and Rubio has never been accused of wrongdoing. Now, back in August of 2022, 4 months before the federal indictment against Rivera was made public, I interviewed Marco Rubio about Rivera's work for Venezuela. I want to just ask you a question because there's been a lawsuit going on for the last few years involving former roommate of yours, a longtime friend of yours, David Rivera, and his representation of the Venezuelan oil company. I'm just sort of curious, have you ever had a conversation with David Rivera regarding his representation of Venezuela?
No, but I can tell you this, that it had nothing to do with me. None of those articles. The only reason, every single one of those articles gratuitously mentions that the guy and I were roommates in Tallahassee over a decade and a half ago. It's just silly. He's someone I've known for a very long time. We've worked closely, but not on this. And there's not a single person claiming otherwise.
Do you keep in touch? Do you talk with David? Have you ever actually asked him, what are you doing representing? You're an outspoken critic of Maduro and Venezuela. Have you ever called him out on this?
I've seen the articles. I've never discussed it with him. I haven't spoken to him in a while. That's not out of design. He's not in Congress anymore. He's moved on and doing the things he's doing. But in the end, it's nothing to do with me. The only reason people ask this is because they're hoping. Everybody, people that ask that question, Jim, including yourself, unfortunately, everyone's hoping there's some sort of linkage to me. Not a single one of these articles claims that there is. And if they did, they'd be lying. The truth of the matter is that it has nothing to do with me. But people like to ask it because they think it'd be interesting if there was something there. Nothing to do with me. I don't know. You have to ask him.
4 months later, when the Rivera indictment was revealed, we learned for the first time about the 2 meetings Rivera had arranged with Rubio. Now, was Rubio truthful back in August of 2022 when he told me that he never had any conversations with Rivera about his representation of Venezuela? Technically, yes. Rubio claims that when he met with Rivera in 2017, he had no idea Rivera was being paid by anyone, so he didn't know Rivera was representing Venezuela. But when I spoke to him, he never disclosed the meetings he had with Rivera about Venezuela. And it was a bit disingenuous to say this case has nothing to do with him. It certainly has to do with him, and that's why he'll be on the witness stand Tuesday morning. Now, in advance of the trial, I spoke to the Miami Herald's longtime federal courts reporter, Jay Weaver. So, Jay, what are we expecting to hear from Marco Rubio when he takes a stand on Tuesday?
Well, I think he's going to have to come clean, and he's going to have to be very straightforward, and he's going to have to stick to what he told the FBI. And what he told the FBI and what he told prosecutors is that he did meet with David Rivera, his old friend, whom they've known each other since their days in the state legislature a couple of decades ago. And he's going to tell him that they met twice in Washington, D.C., and they met in 2017, and they did talk about, Venezuela. But what he's going to probably say is, look, we talked about Venezuela, but we talked about an exit strategy. We both wanted Maduro out. We both wanted a change in the regime, and we both wanted him to hold fair, free and fair elections.
The key is going to be, though, that he's going to say he didn't even know Rivera had this contract at the time that they met. And that, in a way, that actually bolsters the government's case that Rivera was acting as a foreign agent without disclosing it to government officials.
Well, that's a very interesting question, because on the one hand, the ostensible reason why Rivera didn't, register as a foreign agent, and his consultant friend Esther Newford didn't register as a foreign agent when they got this $50 million contract from, Venezuela's national oil company subsidiary in the United States, is they didn't want anybody to know about it, right? They didn't even want Rubio to know about it. And so Rubio kind of he can play it both ways. He can say, I didn't know anything about it. And while we were discussing, normalizing relations with Venezuela, which means getting rid of Maduro as president, I had no idea that he was getting paid a $50 million salary. It plays well for Rubio. It does not play well for Rivera.
I guess just taking a step back here for a second, I got to admit, I'm amazed this case is still going to trial. I would have thought that given David's connections, Rivera's connections within the Republican Party, being a former Republican congressman, that this case never would have went forward once Donald Trump was elected president, if for no other reason than to spare the embarrassment of having his Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, have to testify in this case and rehash all of these connections to David Rivera. What's your thinking? Are you a little surprised that this case is going to
Yeah,
forward?
I'm a little surprised, because the chattering classes, who talk about this stuff here and in DC, they're basically saying they thought, because of the Pam Bondi memo, where she says, we're not doing any more of these foreign agent cases where people don't register unless it involves espionage. And so right there, you're thinking, okay, here's a memo. It's pushed by the Trump administration, by Trump himself in his second term. And then on top of all that, you're thinking, okay, so they're going to make it go away for that reason and pressure the prosecutors here to dismiss the case, right? And because they've been doing this around the country, including the Eric Adams case, as you know, in New York. And, in addition to that, there was a feeling that maybe the case would go away because Rivera's Marco's longtime friend. And, you'd think, okay, maybe he can make it go away and it would clean the slate. But for some reason, it never happened. And everybody was going, wow, this thing is going to trial. And a lot of people were surprised, just like you, just like me. And now here we are going to trial. And in some ways, maybe this helps Marco Rubio because he has aspirations to become president. He's a very high profile Secretary of State. He's by far the most important person in the administration after Trump. Forget about Vance, forget about Susie Wild, the chief of staff. Marco Rubio is really the second most important person in the Trump administration. He is likely to run for president. This won't be a good look, but it'll be less of a bad look than it would have been if he had asked Trump to basically pressure the Justice Department to dismiss the charges.
We'll be right back. Well, that's all the time we have today. If you have any thoughts or comments, feel free to contact me at jdefede@cbs.com. Oh, how I do enjoy hearing from you. Thanks again for watching, and enjoy the rest of your day.